How long were you at Van Buren?
I started it, that was my very first school, and that was back in 1960. It was the year after, and I have to say this, Frank, because one of the best years of my life was 59 and 60, because I was the band director, the very first band director for the Indiana State Sparkettes.
Oh.
And my office was in the gymnasium, and that was a funny place to be, but I had to work with the drill team who was assigned to the PE department and everything, and to the athletic department. And so anyway, I came off of that, and one of the schools that my placement director knew of was Van Buren, and they needed a music director. And so I came to Van Buren in 1960. That was my first year.
What were the Sparkettes?
The Sparkettes were a drill team, and they were, there were a bunch of girls that didn't want to play instruments, that wanted to use the pom-poms and that kind of thing, and dance and strut in front of the band. And so they were excellent. They did a good job.
So they were with Van Buren's band?
Yes, we had about 8 of them at that time. They weren't big, because I didn't want a whole lot of them, but we had some girls that were really good, and they added to the performance of the band, which I appreciated.
And how long were you at Van Buren as principal and band director?
Well, I went there as music director. I actually thought the hardest thing to do is to teach kindergarten and first grade. That's not easy to do. I still admire elementary teachers. And I was fortunate because 2 years later, the school board hired me an elementary music man, Noble Lundgartner. And Mr. Lundgartner was one of the best. He had the kids singing, and they enjoyed music. And oh my, it was so good. He was a good singer. We used to sing together. And he was a very good man. And it was a privilege to be able to work with him.
Yeah. And then when did you get involved with the Brazil Concert Band?
Brazil Concert Band, I played under John Watler, who was my band director at the time. And anyway, John told me he was going to retire, and so Wilford Dobson was a good friend of mine, and Mr. Dobson was on the Brazil Band board, and they interviewed me and asked me if I would like to direct the band, and I said yes. And so I directed the band then from 1960 to 65, and then I went to Kendallville at East Noble, who sometimes...
So you were the band director of Brazil Concert Band for 5 years?
Oh yeah, well,
okay.
For not only for that, but from 1960 to 1965, and then when I came back in 66, they'd had several band directors, and they wanted me to come back, and so I did. I was a concert band director again for 66 to about 71, and at that time, again, Dr. Moody, who was from Clay City and was placement director over at Indiana State University, brought me into the office and said I needed a bigger school if I wanted to be a superintendent. And so he got me Washington High School to be the principal there. I went down to Washington, Indiana, to the Hatchets, and was principal there for many, many years. You know, the interesting thing, Frank, is that I'd had a helper out of Van Buren. Mr. Spencer took care of the elementary while I was taking care of the junior high and high school. But when I went to Washington, I had 2 assistant principals. And the hardest thing I had to do was decide who was going to do what. There were 3 of us. And all of a sudden, and they said, why don't you take this one? And little did I know that was the toughest thing. So, so I did. I took this one. And interesting, I introduced the paddle, as a matter of fact, to the hallways of Washington High School.
The paddles.
Yes.
That sounds like discipline.
It was very much so. And that straightened a lot of people out. It was really a good thing. It wasn't, I never missed my target, and always could warm your back end pretty quick, and we walked a little straighter after that. We miss that in schools today.
I was going to say, what do you think about the lack of corporal punishment today?
I think that there's many that could administer that and do a good job, and I think I think young people would think twice before they did some of the things that they do now. And they do some nasty things now,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Man.
So then you came back and you started playing with the Brazil Concert Band again.
Yes, came back and I didn't play with them. I directed them and I conducted. And but I really enjoyed that because in those days I didn't really have a secretary. I did it all myself, and it was I put the music in the folios and everything, and it was a good thing.
So last night you received a plaque where they call you Mr. Van Buren. Talk to
Yes.
me about that.
Well, Mr. Van Buren, we used to, anyone that was principal, you used to say Mr. Van Buren. Harold Spencer used to be the, as I say, he was my assistant, and he used to be at the microphone at the ball games, and he would say, good evening, boys and girls of Van Buren, and they would say, good evening, Mr. Van Buren. Harold Spencer had that name first, and he was good. And Herb Rissler, who was the greatest principal I ever saw in my life.
Yeah.
He was a good man.
That's great. And you heard from a lot of your former Van Buren students last
my
night,
goodness.
didn't you?
Well, Rick McQueen, I really enjoyed seeing him. He was fun. He used to play E flat out on saxophone for me. He's still teaching, I think, at Martinsville High School, and he teaches history, and that's a good subject. I think all music directors would like a minor in history. They enjoy history, and but Rick, the whole family. There was Kay and Jane and Marla. I remember that. Kay, Jane, and Marla, and Rick. Marla played flute. Kay played French horn, a good French horn player, and Jane played flute player. The important thing about the schools then, Frank, is that they were close. They were close to the school. We were a family, and it's changed. The bigness, the huge part of things, has wasted a lot of the heart and the relationship of the kids and the teachers. And we used to be called family. We were all family, and that's been taken away from us, and that's too bad. It's hard to make a big school a small school.
I think one of the things that has impressed me most over the years since I've met you some 15 years ago now has been your humility and your greatness. Because when we met, you had the job of, in retirement, of mowing the grass here at the Brazil Times, and you would come in, and some days you would be so hot because it had been so hot outside, and you'd be sweating, and you'd sit down and we'd visit for a while. And it was years later that I found out that you were a school administrator and a teacher.
That was the best days of my life. Mowing the yard, no worries. Those were good times.
And you always walked it. You didn't want to ride anymore.
No. I wouldn't do that at all. I enjoyed it. I used to buy a snapper mower from out at Clarky's, out of the lawn and garden. They'd take good care of me. They'd sharpen my blades and everything. I knew that when my snapper was in front of me, that it was going to cut the grass because my blades were always sharp.
And you always told me a push mower does a much better job than a rider.
Most certainly. And you don't rest at all. You are right behind that mower, and you can see every little bit of crabgrass there is out there in the lawn. That's a good thing.